Great. And I'm going to mute everyone. We're going to sort of get things started and kind of lay the groundwork here, and then we'll kind of open things up as we go. So please be patient with us, and we look forward to engaging some conversation a little bit later on. Um,
Bad about leaving.
Great to see you all. I'm going to do a little mute here. No offense to anybody.
Why is this off on the side? Weird.
Go and okay. Great. Welcome, everyone. And on behalf of Temple Israel, I am thrilled to present Israel and Pop Culture, a four-part series focusing on our relationship to Israel, its identity, and the rise of anti-Semitism through the lens of popular Israeli and Israel-focused film and TV. And as a backdrop to that, Noah Tishby's book, Israel, A Simple Guide to the Most Misunderstood Country on Earth. And on the heels of our spiel about Spielberg series earlier in the year, and with deep gratitude to Miriam and Dr. Isaac Bar and their Israeli Education Fund, I am over the moon to bring back filmmaker Joe Frankel as our guest teacher. Joe has worked as a writer, director, producer, and story editor in Toronto, New York, and LA for companies ranging from Cineplex Entertainment to Universal Studios. His credits are many, and he has found his way into varying aspects of the entertainment world. And in 2019 founded Imaginary Courtyard Inc., which is a content agency that promotes upcoming movies for all the major studios. And in 2020, Joe created IC Movieology, an online film school that offers courses in film studies, screenwriting, and film production. He's an alumnus of the MFA screenwriting program at USC and the BFA film and video production program at York University, co-founder of Zoom Student Film Festival, where he sits on the annual judges panel reviewing submissions from emerging filmmakers around the world. So welcome, Joe. Thank you for being here. And I'd like to sort of begin with the foundational component of this series, which is Noah Tishby's book. From actress to activist, Noah has become an unofficial diplomat for Israel. And as of yesterday, it has just been announced that she will be Israel's first special envoy for combating anti-Semitism and delegitimization. Amazing. For those of you who aren't already scheduled to come join when Noah Tishby actually will present here at Temple Israel, please mark your calendars. I think we're looking at May the 16th for that date. I'll confirm at the end of our program. But she is as fascinating and brilliant as she is glamorous. So please come join us. So anti-Semitic attacks, both online and in person, are on the rise, and Israel is a rare country whose right to exist is regularly challenged. Noah has said framing the situation as pro-Palestinian or pro-Israel is problematic at the core. This is a very American framing, which she sees a lot on college campuses. She's also said, in Israel there is coexistence, and she is willing to educate anyone who will listen. And now as an official envoy, though not as an employee of the Israel government, as the role is unpaid, Tishby said she would work to create alliances with groups who might not be aware of the rise in anti-Semitism and share with them that the increase in anti-Semitism is bad for an entire society. She also said that she would raise awareness in international forums such as the United Nations to push more governments and organizations to adopt the International Holocaust Remembrance Association as a working definition of anti-Semitism and a legal baseline. In addition, Tishby said she would utilize her own social media networks, with hundreds of thousands of followers to engage with people online and work closely with anti-Semitism envoys in other countries, including Deborah Lipstadt, who was finally confirmed by the Senate last month as the State Department's special envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism. So, as a gifted author, she has said how critically important it is to tell the Israeli story well. So I believe she would appreciate the quote from Carl Sagan, "You have to know the past to understand the present." And for those who haven't read her book, I really encourage it. It is a really an amazing read. She really sort of feels as though you're almost having a conversation with her. It's incredibly accessible, and I found it to be a very quick read. So please, if you haven't already, take a look at the book. But in her book, she describes T.E. Lawrence, or Lawrence of Arabia, as one of her heroes. Through his brilliant work as an archaeologist, a diplomat, and military strategist, we can better understand the Middle East as we know it today. And we're going to show a slide here, just to sort of give a sense of the scope of this movie, which is epic, truly one of the epic movies of all time, if you haven't seen it, in 70 millimeter. And I know Joe will sort of bring some of those aspects of the film to bear. But he helped to lead an Arab revolt in World War I, which played a major role in the victory of the Triple Entente, as it's called, of Britain, France, and Russia. And that changed the course of Middle Eastern history. For Lawrence, what began as an archaeological dig through the British Museum turned into a love affair with the Middle East, its people, and its customs. He ingratiated himself to a point where he was serving as the trusted arbitrator of tribal disputes and an expert in Kurdish relations. And when tensions began to ratchet up in World War I, the alliances were less than clear. Britain, France, and Russia were on one team, Austria, Hungary, and Germany on another. The Brits took a small army to map out the Negev Desert. Why was this small slice of land so important? 3 words: the Suez Canal. It's a small, unassuming body of water that connects the Mediterranean and Red Seas. It's essentially a bridge between the East and West. So a strategic point that would impact the future of Britain's economy. Lawrence was recruited to map out this area, which he did brilliantly. And no sooner had that happened than the Ottomans sided with Germany and Lawrence joined the British army. He was stationed in Cairo, where he met and befriended the Emir of Mecca, Prince Faisal. Lawrence, together with Faisal, led an otherwise disorganized group of tribesmen to a key victory at Aqaba. And what did the Arabs request for fighting against the Turks on behalf of the British? Of course, independence. And the Brits agreed, only to go behind everyone's back and negotiate a secret agreement with the French called the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and divided the whole Middle East between themselves, with a vague second promise to Russia having some influence over Egypt, and a third promise for the Jews. That promise came in the form of the Balfour Declaration in 1918, which promised to reestablish the national home for the Jewish people in a little backwater province known as Palestine. But the Sykes-Picot Agreement screwed everyone, much to the Arabs, Jews, and Lawrence's chagrin. And in the post-war Paris Peace Conference, Lawrence helped Faisal write a speech that he delivered that spoke not only to Arab independence, but to Jewish independence. He said, "We Arabs, especially the educated among us, look with the deepest sympathy on the Zionist movement. We are working together for a reformed and revived Near East, and our two movements complete one another. The Jewish movement is national and not imperialist. Our movement is national and not imperialist, and there is room in Syria for us both. Indeed, I think that neither can be a real success without the other. I look forward, and my people with me look forward to a future in which we will help you and you will help us, so that the countries in which we are mutually interested may once again take their place in the community of civilized peoples of the world. So it's important, I think, to set the stage in this way, understanding a little bit of where our Palestinian-Israeli conflict comes from. And really, as a perfect example of that in terms of media, Lawrence of Arabia really depicts beautifully the complexity of this question and the politics of the region. So we're going to watch a little bit, and I'm going to invite Joe to come into the conversation and join us, share a little bit of this movie with us.
Yeah, thanks for that great opening and that introduction, by the way, Cantor Neil. And I think the one credit that you neglected to give me, which is the most important one for anyone that wasn't with us for the Spielberg class, is that we're also brothers-in-law. and
I wanted to read you something.
That has opened more doors than anything I've done in the film business. But I wanted to just answer what you just said as well and point out that not only does the story that Lawrence of Arabia portrays give a context for the roots of modern day conflict in the Middle East, but it also points to the possibility of peaceful resolution through diplomacy when you have two reasonable and magnanimous thinking people at the helm. And that's one of the really interesting things that Lawrence of Arabia digs into, that friendship between Prince Faisal and T.E. Lawrence is amicable. And Lawrence is willing to embrace and consider what life is like to be Arab in that region. And Prince Faisal is capable of sympathy and identification with the Jewish people and people outside his own group. So there's a lot of really interesting dialogue between the two of them in the film. And I'll just share my screen with you for a minute. To come back to Noah Tishby as well, one really interesting thing, and this book would not have been on my radar without you, Cantor Neil, was just the idea that Tishby points to the significance of social media in shaping and managing PR for Israel as a country. And she experienced this firsthand when she spoke impromptu at a rally in favor of Israel while she was living in LA. But it immediately blew up because somebody photographed her and the Israeli government took notice. And on the merits of a conversation she held with a senior member of the Israeli Defense Force, Israel revamped their entire social media campaign. And so when you invited me to co-host this series with you, I was excited to dig into how Israel and Middle East has been represented in film and television, but there's also a very relevant social media conversation to be had because anything that happens in Israel gets reported on in real time through social media. And that's an ongoing concern and challenge when anti-Semitism is such a problem like it is right now, right? So these stories are really interesting to look at, and particularly Lawrence of Arabia, because it is such a timeless and towering movie in the culture of film. And one of the amazing things that it captures is the expanse of the desert, the sheer scale of it, and how vulnerable anyone traveling through it is to attack. There's just nowhere to hide as you're crossing the desert. And the movie makes this incredible statement in visceral cinematic terms from the outset with this very famous edit that anyone who's seen the film probably remembers, which is one moment T.E. Lawrence is demonstrating the principle of pain management by waving his hand over an open flame. And in the next, he's lighting a match. And as he blows that match out, there is a cut to the sun rising over the desert as he arrives there for the first time. And it's one of these very memorable, powerful edits that get talked about a lot in film criticism, because it's so striking visually, but it also kind of speaks symbolically to what Lawrence will be leaving behind. In a way, the flame of the match is something containable and within human control. The desert and this great big ball of fire that's the sun is much more unknowable and much more ambiguous and much harder to control. So he enters this volatile space, and the movie immediately kind of presents you with this iconic rendition of what that is. It makes you feel it, even if your brain isn't necessarily putting all of that together from the outset. And as he embarks on his journey, he and his Arab guide encounter a well in the desert and go to drink from it after wandering in the desert and growing very thirsty. And that's the scene that we're going to show here. It's about 7 minutes long. It's a little bit slow as a disclaimer, but the speed of it is partly the point. And we'll talk about that after the clip. So here we go.
Good? It's all right. This is a Harriet well. The Harriet are dirty people.
Tex?
But
Okay, let's pause for a second, Joe, because I think we're having trouble hearing, or some say very soft. I just want to make sure that we're. Some are saying very soft. Can I see a show of hands? Are people hearing this or not? A little bit? Not at all? Okay. See if we can optimize maybe the hearing or the audio. Did you already do that? You're muted, sorry.
I did. Did you want to try to play it on your end? Do you have it on your side as well? Let me play it one more time and see if this is any better, okay?
Yes.
And we'll just chime in if you're not hearing it. Right now, the sound is incredibly faint in the mix of the film itself.
Hearing nothing.
And this is meant to be a near silent clip.
It is silent.
If we jump ahead a little.
Tavas!
He is dead.
Yes. Why?
This is my well.
I have drunk from it.
You are welcome.
He was my friend.
That?
Yes, that.
This pistol yours?
No, his.
His?
Mine.
Then I will use it. Your friend was a Hazmi of the Beni Salim.
I know.
I am Ali ibn al-Kharish.
I've heard of you.
So, what was a Hazmi doing here?
He was taking me to help Prince Faisal.
You have been sent from Cairo.
Yes.
I have been in Cairo for my schooling. I can both read and write. My Lord Faisal already has an Englishman.
Yes.
What is your name?
My name is for my friends. None of my friends is a murderer.
You are angry, English. He was nothing. The well is everything. The Hazimi may not drink at our wells. He knew that. Salam. Hut, hut, hut.
Sheriff Ali!
So long as the Arabs fight tribe against tribe, so long will they be a little people, a silly people, greedy, barbarous, and cruel, as you are.
So apologies to anybody that had trouble hearing that. The clip is very still and very quiet by intention, by design, until Omar Sharif gets closer. And I guess one of the purposes in showing that is to illustrate how long it takes Sharif to cross the desert to Lawrence. Functions on both a symbolic level from a storytelling perspective and also on a visceral level. In a way, the movie is describing the divide that they will have to cross in order to find peace between them, because they come from two completely different worlds. And on a more visceral gut level, in a way that movies are uniquely able to express, we sit and wait for that horse to get closer as it slowly crosses the desert, and it really makes us feel the scale of it. And taken out of context, and given that this is a movie from 1962, I don't know, also watching it on a small screen, how this resonates for people. It's ironic we're watching it this way because David Lean and the producers of the film chose the 70 millimeter film format, which was the biggest format available to watch this movie on. And the big screen was the optimal opportunity to engage the biggest possible audience with this story. It's a story that David Lean obviously deeply felt. It took almost 300 days for them to film this movie in the desert. And the average duration of a film shoot nowadays is 30 days. So that commitment that was made is just something that you wouldn't see today. And of course, the scale of the production, the vastness of the desert would probably be rendered with computer graphics, but here we're seeing it done for real, which has a certain power. And as Cantor Neil pointed out, this friendship between Lawrence and Prince Faisal, who he soon finds in the chronology of the film, becomes hugely important in representing the possibility of peace in the Middle East. And also hugely, I think, instructive and enlightening for us as an audience, that when you watch this and you see how their friendship unfolds, from the very outset, when they first meet in Faisal's tent, he makes the statement that no Arab loves the desert. There is an assumption in the West that they fight for the land because they love the land. But he says very poetically that he longs for the forgotten gardens of Cordoba. And through this very terse conversation, they learn that they can trust one another. Now, we don't know whether a friendship developed this quickly, and definitely we would have to assume that the movie takes liberties with the history, but it's compelling and it's provocative to watch this even today and recognize that we're kind of where we started in many ways. So through the course of this movie, because movies are built so much around characters who want something and are forced to overcome obstacles to get it, we'll just check back in with Lawrence for this final clip before we move on to our next show. And in this scene, Lawrence has just won the Battle of Aqaba. He and Faisal have successfully rallied all of the Arab troops together, and he's returning to the British Army base in Cairo as a victorious soldier. But you will see from the way that he's dressed, from the attitudes of the soldiers around them, how much he has changed since that scene we just watched, and what sort of conflict, new conflict, that change has opened up for him.
Great, thank you, Joe. And I've got the clip as well, too, if we have some issues, so we can
Okay.
try it on both ends.
Hopefully this one will be more audible. It's a straight up dialogue scene indoors, and there's nothing fancy with the soundtrack, but let's give this a try.
Great. Hear it pretty clearly on my end. Let us know if you're having any issues.
Sorry, are you saying it's too loud?
No, I can hear it clearly. I just wanted to make sure that everyone was in the same boat.
Everybody else hearing it all right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Here we go.
Daoud! We're here, sir. You taking him in there, sir? Yes.
Here, you! And where the hell do you think you're going to, Mustafa?
We're thirsty.
Mr. Lawrence, is it?
Yes.
Are you going to the officer's bar, sir?
Yes.
You can't take him in there, sir. What do you think you look like?
No, you must. No, go, Effendi, go. Get out, you must get out. Get out.
We want 2 large glasses of lemonade.
This is a part of British officers.
That's all right. We are not particular.
Lawrence! Are you off your head?
No. Oddly enough, I'm not.
Now, look here, Lawrence. Just clear out of here, will you?
Go on, Lawrence. Clear
Get that boy out of here.
Corporal! We'll have this one out anyway.
Get that wog out of here. Yes, clear off. Go on, get the little wog out. What's going on?
It's Lawrence, sir.
Lemonade with ice.
Well, explain yourself.
We've taken Aqaba.
Taken Aqaba? Who has?
We have. Our side in this war has. The Wogs have. We have. He likes your lemonade.
You mean the Turks have gone?
No, they're still there, but they've no boots. Prisoners, sir. We took them prisoners, the entire garrison. No, that's not true. We killed some. Too many, really. I'll manage it better next time. It's been a lot of killing, one way or another.
Okay.
Cross my heart and hope to die. It's all perfectly true.
It isn't possible.
Yes, it is. I did it.
You'd better talk to Allenby.
General Allenby?
Yes, he's in command now. Murray's gone.
Well, that's a step in the right direction. First, I want a room with a bed, with sheets.
Yes, yes, of course.
It's for him.
Right. You want a bed yourself, don't you?
See Allenby first, though. Will he see me?
I think so.
Do that, then. I'd better shave.
Yes, you had. You'd better get into some trousers, too.
It's a really brilliant cinematic way to make a point, a simple point, that when it comes to conflict in the Middle East, it's almost impossible to enter into it from a diplomatic standpoint and emerge the same person. And the movie really makes you feel that. David Lean, who's one of the greatest of directors, has a couple of very beautiful details happening in this scene. From the mud that's caked to Lawrence's face, as if he's come fresh from the battlefield, to the bodies rising in the foreground of the shot as he and the Arab boy walk into the officer's mess. And when they leave, the officers part for them, but you see the looks of disbelief on their faces. You register the prejudice that these British soldiers hold, just institutionally, really, against the Arabs that they have recruited to help them win this battle. And it's rendered through sound and through image in a way that movies make very, very immediate. And, you know, when people think about Lawrence of Arabia, they always remember the big, sprawling, panoramic views of the desert. But the movie juxtaposes the epic and the intimate so beautifully, and it never loses sight of the characters. And that's part of the special alchemy, I think, that makes it a classic film and a memorable film. And then in this context, it's really interesting because Lawrence takes on kind of a mythic stature through the course of this film. And even Noah Tishby, in writing her book, Cantor Neil and I were remarking that to a certain degree, she romanticizes Lawrence in terms of how she represents him and his importance in the region and the history of the region. But there's probably a purpose for this. And that's one of the things that Cantor Neil and I want to parse and pull apart a little bit and discuss with all of you. So if at any point you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the chat or to chime in, and we'd love to hear from you too. If not, I'm just going to keep going until there's anything. But we see the cost of diplomacy, right? That's what these images really speak to. That's what the look on Lawrence's face shows us in a very immediate way. And the cost to Lawrence is spiritual. He goes to the Middle East representing his country, and he returns to his country as an alien to them. And in a sense, he loses sight of who he was. He's either someone new or he's two people. Maybe he's more than two people. And that's part of what makes the character fascinating as represented in the film. It's what makes him a romantic hero. And he is definitively romanticized through the movie. It's impossible to know whether he was as courageous and defiant and self-possessed as he's shown to be when his Arab guide is gunned down at the well in the first scene, when his own soldiers and superiors confront him and he rebukes them. We don't know if the real Lawrence was this outspoken and had this much bravado and courage. But one of the film's greatest champions, Steven Spielberg, asked if the movie would have been as great if it had simply recreated the chronology of what took place historically speaking. Or is it necessary when you're making a film about real events like these to take some poetic license with the material and with the character? Noah Tishby's interpretation of Lawrence was that he was somebody who didn't ask for permission from the government. He made choices and tough decisions, and then he apologized later if he was wrong. So she very much sees him as kind of this early proto rock star within the region. And I think the contradictions within the character and how he's represented, and the very complicated motives, but also the agreement that he's able to forge with Prince Faisal, speak to not only the complexities of the region and its history, but also just the complexity of human relationships at large. I think one of the reasons Lawrence of Arabia is such a towering movie in the culture is because it really does show you all of these different shades and ambiguities that are inherent when you put any two people from different places together in a room. And that's really, really interesting. And then I would never have actually situated it within the history of Israel until reading Noah Tishby's book. Would you agree with that, Cantor Neil?
Well, I was actually very, very taken aback by the amount of time she spent talking about not just T. Lawrence, but this part of history in understanding the region, which is why we've also chosen to take so much time this evening and share a little bit of it through the lens of the film, which, you know, again, as Joe so eloquently put, is a Hollywood version, but in an effort, though, I think, to in some way represent history and the moments of history that we can only imagine what might have happened. But ultimately, the impression that was left and of a man who chose to go maybe against the grain, and in doing so made an incredible difference at that time, which really serves as a perfect segue, Joe, to the sort of the main feature of what we wanted to talk about tonight, which is The Spy. And I don't know if any of you had the chance to watch that on Netflix, but it is a limited series that we both have dug into a little bit, and have found a really wonderful correlation between Lawrence as a difference maker and the person we're about to talk about as another person who has, through his example and his sacrifice, has made an incredible difference, and that is Ellie Cohen. So I don't know, maybe this is a good time to share a little bit of history. What do you think, Joe?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess we're situating this within the 6-Day War.
Yes.
And I can share that slideshow whenever you'd like.
Great. You can start showing it, and I'll just sort of tell a little bit about Ellie, who really, it's surprising because Ellie Cohen is considered to be Israel's most famous spy, and really with good reason. But it's only until this series that we have really, seen him depicted, at least in film. And he was an Egyptian-born Jew. And he used the alias Kamel Amin Thabet and rose to the upper echelons of Syrian society in the 1960s. And as this limited series depicts, Syria's then president, Amin al-Hafez, reportedly offered Cohen the position of deputy defense minister. But his history, was from a fairly humble. He started off from a fairly humble place. He was born in Alexandria, Egypt, and worked for the Jewish state long before emigrating there. And at the time, the Arab nations, including Egypt and Syria, were ramping up repression against their native Jewish populations. After failing to destroy Israel in the War of Independence in 1948. And as a result, there were an estimated 850,000 Jews who fled or were expelled from Arab countries in the years following the war. And Cohen, who was released by the Egyptian authorities for lack of evidence, didn't come to Israel until 1956. He worked as a translator for the Israeli military intelligence and settled down with his wife, Nadia Majald, who was an Iraqi-born Jew. Despite their failure to destroy Israel in 1948, Arab nations persisted in efforts to target and harass the Jewish state. Indeed, the youthful Egyptian leader, Gamal Abdel Nasser, spent much of the 1950s sponsoring Fedayeen, which were terrorist groups attacking civilians in Israel's south. And Israel responded, in part with a targeted assassination campaign aimed at the Egyptian military, who were overseeing these attacks. As the 60s rolled around, the situation became more and more perilous. Nasser had regrouped and was recruiting Nazi scientists to build long-distance missiles to attack the Jewish state. North of Israel, Syria was also getting ready for military action. They were sharpening their sword. And they were flush with Soviet funds. So Syria was arming and preparing for war. And concerned, Jerusalem really needed to have a spy in Syria, in Damascus, and had an ambitious plan for preparing to put an undercover Israeli there. And enter Cohen, who was really the man for the job. And he spent more than 6 months training before he was sent to Argentina in February 1961 to build a cover story. He was posing as this alias Kamel Amin Thabet, a Syrian businessman born in Lebanon, and Cohen cast himself as a wealthy patriot looking to do good deeds for his homeland. What was amazing was he was able to ingratiate himself so quickly with Arab entrepreneurs, and was successful at meeting, the rich and the influential of the Syrian community. Ultimately, some of these things would prove fateful for both Cohen and Israel. But in the meantime, he was moved to Syria in 1962 to help facilitate his introduction to high society in the Arab nations in the capital. And he cultivated his relationships by throwing lavish parties, and that trust paid dividends later. So that's a little bit of the background on Cohen, who was again a towering figure in Israel's sort of military history, and very interestingly, has been cast with Sacha Baron Cohen playing him. So I think that's an interesting point to make, and we'll kind of touch on that a little bit. But certainly a departure from his previous works in comedy and satire. And here he is in sort of a almost entirely dramatic role.
I'm just going to bring up the slide on Sacha Baron Cohen, Cantor Neil, because it makes a nice companion to what you're saying.
So
there
for
he
those
is.
of you who are not familiar with Sacha Baron Cohen's other works, here's a pretty good overview, and as you can see, it goes from sort of the sublime to the ridiculous to the more ridiculous. And he sort of willingly puts himself in the situation of anyone but Sacha Baron Cohen. He is truly, as represented in the slide, a master of disguise. And if you've seen any of the Borat movies or his other works, he often goes undercover and has conversations with very real people, and brings out the cruelties of their opinions, while playing this this part. And now here he is, sort of being thrust into a part that is all too real, and sort of having to in a very real way uphold the very legendary memory of Ellie Cohen.
And I'll jump in there as well, Cantor Neil, because one thing that's quite striking is that this time, and only this time, he chooses to play the role very straight. And we can kind of speculate why that might be. I have a brief interview where he describes Ellie Cohen in his words and what drew him to the part. So maybe we'll show that, and then we'll come back to this slide.
Great.
Okay.
This is a real story of a real kind of average man, a guy who was an accountant in a supermarket. And the Mossad chose him and decided, for some reason, to put all their hopes into him, because at the time they had no knowledge of what was going on in Syria. So they gave him this opportunity to play a role, he was basically acting, as a multi-millionaire Argentinian businessman of Syrian descent. And he was so successful at it that he became probably the most successful spy in the 20th century, without ever killing anyone, without ever, setting off a bomb. This was a guy who succeeded through his intelligence, through his charm, and through taking, risks, actually. There were 2 books about him that we read. We spoke to the family, we spoke to some of his handlers at the Mossad. So there are people who knew him. There's no footage, obviously, because real spies, they don't record any videos. But there are some photos actually from Syria where, there's one of him actually on the Syrian battlements in the Golan Heights, which no civilian had ever gained access to. But it's like him smiling with one of the Syrian soldiers there. So somehow he was able to get people to trust him so much that they risked their own careers. And a lot of these people at the end, they destroyed their careers and went to jail because he was such an effective spy. If you are good, it's the reason I was drawn to this character is, I've gone in character for 8 hours at a time, 10 hours. But this guy kept his character for 5 years. And it's a difficult thing to do, to create a character where, where no one can see any cracks in it. So think about it, for Ellie Cohen to survive in Damascus for that amount of time, it means that he didn't slip up at all for all of those years. You remember seeing The Great Escape where they go, what is it, congratulations, and he goes, you're welcome, or good luck. If there's any mistakes, then you're done. He would have been imprisoned, tortured, and probably killed. So I don't think it's that people are susceptible to it. I think that this guy was probably the greatest actor in history.
So hearing him describe it in his own words, helps us kind of get a sense of what would have drawn him to the character. And there's certainly beautiful correlations that you drew between the characters he's played previously and Ellie Cohen, the spy. Cantor Neil, there's no question that there's some relationship happening there that uniquely qualified Sacha Baron Cohen to attempt to take on this role. But it is really interesting, don't you think, that he chose to play it straight, and that for whatever reason, in his satirical films, he has no problem poking the bear and making a joke out of the villains in the story as he sees fit. But here, the emphasis is different. He's not only the star of this series, he's also the executive producer of it. And it was clearly important to him to tell this story, but he's honoring a hero this time. He's not ridiculing a villain. So he's drawing from a completely different part of his worldview that is simpatico and complimentary, but he's using his voice differently, right?
It's interesting, I think, too, because you hear the actor part of Sacha, loving the challenge, or seeing maybe Ellie as he said, as the greatest actor, and maybe seeing that as a challenge for him to go deep with a role, and really, what would it be like for me, who someone who has maybe only spent a portion of a day trying to embody a character, to really go all in and find things, the aspects of this person on a deeper level, which maybe speaks to your question about why go straight with this one, having such an incredible touch with satire and irony. And you can see little glimpses in this series, if you haven't already had a chance. Again, a really very highly entertaining story about a real life situation, a real life person. In the party sequences, where you see his charisma and charm, really come through, and that he is fully engaged in those moments. And you have to think that the real Ellie Cohen must have had to be at least that charming, to be undetectable at the highest echelons of Syrian society. So, like you said, probably the greatest actor of all time.
Yeah. Should we watch a trailer for the series for anyone that hasn't seen it?
Yeah, let's do that. Let's.
Let me share that.
And just while we're doing that, the series itself is 6 episodes, so it's hard to kind of pick and choose various scenes from it. It's really best watched in chronology, and to sort of follow the journey of the character, the story of his family, and certainly the relationship between Israel and Syria, which ultimately resulted in this the War of '67, the Six-Day War.
That's interesting. They're totally different too. Lawrence of Arabia and The Spy couldn't possibly be more different in terms of their story, the tone, the whole aesthetic of how they're made and how the stories are told. And you'll see that when you watch this trailer. But at core, and we kind of touched on this or glossed over it at the beginning, there are 2 stories about a single human being who stepped into a difficult situation to make a difference and succeeded at great sacrifice to themselves. And here, as in Lawrence, Ellie Cohen is literally forced to adopt a completely new identity that's foreign to him in order to achieve his goal. So here we go. I'll share the trailer for anyone who hasn't seen it.
Do you consider yourself a patriot?
I love this country with all my might. Welcome to Syria.
If your country needed you to lie to your friends, your family, your wife, would you do it?
I will be a buyer working for the government.
If your country asked you to risk your life, would you do it?
This is the opportunity for me to give you the life that I promised you, Daddy. My name is Kamel Amin Thabit.
The Sheikh is your only way in. Please join me.
You've made a nice life for yourself here in Damascus. When you walk into your room, everyone wants a piece of you.
Come in. Enjoy.
You can trust me with your life. I hope I can do the same. We all have secrets.
This is not a game, Kamel. You are either him or you are dead.
Nadia, I'm worried about you. When's the last time you saw Ellie?
11 months ago. Don't leave us.
I don't want to go back.
You are saving lives, Ellie. Remember that.
When I first became Kamel, it was just an act.
You mumble in your sleep. You sometimes shout out names.
Those nightmares that she was talking about, they're not even mine, they're Kamel's.
Let's have an open, honest conversation on what my husband does.
Thinking of the clothes, it doesn't work anymore. I can't put him away.
Kamel isn't real. That life isn't real. You are Ellie Cohen. You need to remember that.
It's a bit late for that.
So,
one of the more poignant parts of this series, without creating any spoilers here, is the relationship between Ellie and his wife, and how much of it is based on fact, we don't know. There's been some of it that's been disputed, but it's important to sort of note the as this slide suggests, the cost again, as there was for Lawrence, of diplomacy. And the movie does a really, I think, excellent job of showing the conflict and the challenge to be this person chosen by his country, by his superiors, to really do the impossible and create a mission that aligns with very, very lofty goals, not just for a human being, but for anyone, on a country level. So he, clearly struggled with that. How much we can't really know. Again, he was undercover, but I think that they do a really good job of kind of juxtaposing those two aspects of his life.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the interesting disappointments around the series, which I see in the chat, the name of it is The Spy with Sacha Baron Cohen. But one
available on Netflix only.
Yeah. And we tried to find it other places with no success. But what's a little bit disappointing, having watched this with you, Cantor Neil, is that it didn't get a better reception and have more commercial success. It actually may be partly because the material is difficult and a subject matter that people have to kind of work themselves up to receive to a degree. Some of the critical responses to the series were middling to mediocre, and then they touched on the idea that while the story is compelling and important, it follows the trajectory of a standard spy thriller to a large extent. So I think some of its critics accuse it of being a little too Hollywood. I don't think that's necessarily true. And you have to question, depending on who's writing about the series, whether there's even a undercurrent of anti-Semitism at play. You just don't know when it comes to projects like this. But I think the central discussion that we were circling when we prepared for today was really based on the question of, why do we tell these stories? And is it important to tell these stories? And Cantor Neil, you and I agreed that it certainly is. Without telling the story, there's no way that the greater universe outside of who it happened to will know anything about it or be able to learn from it.
Right.
The historical stories are uniquely instructive when they shine a light on what's happening today. And all you have to do is look at the headlines in the Jerusalem Post today, and you'll see that there have been 4 terrorist attacks within Israel in the last month.
Yeah.
So existence and survival is always front of mind if you live there, or if you care about the country, as I'm sure everyone here does. And then it becomes a question of, how can we use our voices? What can we do? What stories are worth telling to hopefully move the dial on the conversation?
It's fascinating too that we are, even as we continue down the road and glimpse a little bit of the future, that the same tropes continue to come up. And perhaps even more so nowadays, which is why Noah Tishby's existence has become what it is, with social media and the prolific spread of opinion, and let's face it, conjecture and lie. And I think we're faced with it on such a daily level that it's almost, that makes it even more imperative that these stories are told, that we have conversations about them, and that we remember, because Israel, again, if we think about this country, 75 years we celebrating in the coming year. 75 years. I mean, for a country, this is still a country in its infancy. And I remember in one of our conversations, Joe, we were talking that Noah makes a really beautiful point about, the vastness of the region and really how tiny Israel is in comparison to not just, a Palestinian ideal, but all of its Arab neighbors. Completely surrounded, if you will.
Yeah, she makes the point that geographically it's smaller than the state of New Jersey.
Right.
And it doesn't possess any uniquely precious resources like oil that make it valuable. It's its history and it's its heritage. And it's the people that have gone through it,
right,
that make it special.
Yes. So we are, this is, a 4-part series, and there are so many pressing questions, but it was important, I think, for us to set the stage and create some foundation for understanding where we've been, so that we can, have some conversations about where we are, and in addressing, sort of the conflicts of Israel coming to independence and the war that immediately followed. These two stories of Lawrence and of Ellie emerged, and we thought it would be a really beautiful way to kind of create a little bit of continuity in sharing both of their stories and the things that actually drove them, both as a way of comparing, but also of suggesting the incredible sacrifices that were required in order for for things to move forward. And these are just two individuals, two human beings who were able to affect incredible change at a time when the odds were quite literally against them.
Yeah, and that's the defining characteristic of the movie and the series we shared with you this week, is they're both hero stories. And there's something radical and something profound about seeing Jewish hero stories, or hero stories that had a positive influence in the origin of the Jewish state. I said to you, Cantor Neil, jokingly, half jokingly, that when you watch The Spy and you see the incredible magic trick that Ellie Cohen achieves for much of the series, it's not unlike watching Marvel's Black Panther for the first time if you happen to be a Black person living in America or Canada, as an example. There's something quite eye-opening and refreshing about just seeing your own people represented in that way on the screen, and how seldom it actually takes place. So there's something very powerful, I think, about that when you watch the series. And next week we're changing gears, but I guess our plan for the remaining weeks is to pin a few films and TV series to specific moments in history. And so next week we'll be looking at the first war in Lebanon with a film called Waltz from Bashir. That was a big Oscar movie back in 2007. It's an animated account from the perspective of Israeli soldiers who survived that battle, and quite a powerful movie with a very unique style and feel all its own.
Yeah, it's a real trip, so to speak, and a surreal adventure. But if you have not seen it, it's absolutely worth watching. A very powerful film, and again, received incredible acclaim, but points to a very painful moment in history and the continuing conflict with Israel and its neighbors. So I see a really wonderful comment here I wanted to share from Marilyn. Thank you. Just if not everyone can read it, but just to say out loud, Ellie Cohen is able to be successful as a spy because of his understanding of human nature. I wonder if these talents feed into anti-Semitic tropes that Jews have special powers and cannot be trusted. It's fascinating, and I think scary, because we are so often targeted. And who I think we're all sort of very fearful for is the next generation, our kids who are going off to college, and the campuses of college where politics are played out in the diag and the rest of it. And how do you respond to the questions that come up when there are these tropes that have found their way for hundreds of years through our history, and why I think it's important to shine a light, as Joe said so well, on how Israel sees itself through film, through TV. So we're going to do a little bit of exploring over the next 2 weeks of different styles of film, from very sort of contemporary versions of things we might see in America to the surreal, like with this coming week. And I think it's appropriate that we're going to be delving into something surreal, because Pesach is coming up in the next few days, and that can be a very surreal experience. You spend a few days on matzah alone. So I think all of us will maybe have a different outlook, a different perspective, as I think Passover asks us to do. And to more importantly than anything, to tell the story of our people. So I think if there aren't any other comments or questions, we'll end it there. Wish everyone Chag Pesach Sameach, Zisen Pesach, and a beautiful week ahead with family, hopefully, and friends, and all of your favorite delicacies. Looking forward to next week. Thank you again to Miriam Alev Shalom and Dr. Isaac Barr for helping to make this series possible. We are deeply grateful and look forward to seeing you all in future weeks. Thanks to my co-teacher as well, Joe Frankel. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.